For many, the new year is a time to reflect on the past and anticipate what comes next. And for us here at Everything Cookbooks, that means taking a look at what's happened and what may happen in the cookbook marketplace. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Molly Stevens, and today I am lucky to be here with Andrea Nguyen, Kristin Donnelly, and Kate Leahy. Happy New Year!
Woohoo!
Happy New Year!
We made it to 2025.
We made it to 2025. I have a lot of mixed feelings around the new year, but it is a time, all the lists are coming out, people looking back, people looking forward. So we thought it'd be really fun to just talk about the year that has been in cookbook trends and what we might see coming on the horizon, especially from a cookbook creation standpoint. So for this episode, we compiled notes from recent conversations that we've had with editors, agents, booksellers, friends of the pod, to offer some of their perspective on the state of the cookbook marketplace and then give our hot takes.
One thing on this podcast, I don't think we're short on hot takes when it comes to cookbooks, so we've got plenty.
Seriously.
We got opinions.
Yeah, and it is a bit of a grab bag, but let's just get right into it. To start, let's look back on some of the trends from 2024 that we saw in cookbooks.
Y'all talked to some agents, right?
Yes. I spoke with Lori Galvin, who she didn't have like one specific trend, but she was just in awe of the sheer variety of cookbooks, which is so true. I mean, I did feel like, especially in the fall, there were all these like influencer books that came out and they all hit the New York Times bestseller list. And I feel like they got attention. But at the same time, it is so true that there's just so many other books that maybe are not hitting the New York Times bestseller list, but are filling our bookshops and maybe have a more niche focus. That's fun to see.
Yeah, and I find it hard. I'm never really good at being a trend watcher. And I think, especially in cookbooks, it's something Matt Sartwell said, who's a bookseller, but that cookbook publishing moves so slowly. So it's two separate things. Like, are you looking for trends in cookbooks or how cookbooks are reflecting trends that are happening in the world? But back to Lori's point about the diversity, I just feel like it was all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, I think part of that was that back in 2020 and 2021, cookbooks were selling like hotcakes. And I think a lot of publishers were looking around for influencers and ideas, and they bought a lot of books. I mean, contracted for a lot of books. And they came to fruition this year.
Right.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the year, the stories on our show, when we're interviewing authors, they're not all pandemic origin stories
As much anymore. I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's still, I do think there's like a residual tail from that, like Andrea is saying, that people were just buying books, like cookbooks, so much in the in the early 2020s. And now that we're getting toward the mid 2020s, they are all coming out, right?
Yeah.
Like one of the pandemic trends, which was baking. Sally Eckes, who is another agent and friend of the show, she pointed out that there were a ton of dessert books that came out. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if we look at the guests we've had a bunch of authors who've written, Sarah Fennell, Burma Bakery, Sift by Nicola Lamb. I mean, the list is on and on and on.
Right. And I would say that for books like Sarah Fennell's book, Sweet Tooth, when Kristin and I spoke with her on the podcast, I mean, she had very specific strategies for how her book was going to succeed based on her platform. And she did say that 2020 was one of the tipping points in her career for content. I mean, that was when her audience just ballooned, because she had been reproached to do books before 2020 and she didn't feel it was the right time. After 2020, I think it was a different story.
Yeah.
It was. In 2020, I mean, they hungered for cooking content while being locked up at home, right, and also to share with friends and family. And so the internet, I know, like on my website, the search results, I got so many hits from places I didn't even like, folks didn't know who I was, but searching for certain things. And so sweets was one of them. Bread was another, like the King Arthur bread book, right?
Well, and the other thing about the King Arthur book, it makes me think of Joe Yonen's book, these big books, these massive books. There are some doorstops that came out in 2024.
Yeah, really.
And did well.
Which is really amazing just thinking about the cost of books. When I look at my royalty statements, you can track your ebook sales versus your hardcover sales. And the ebooks are there, but it's usually not a really prominent part of a cookbook author's royalty statement. That means that people are shelling out money for hardcover books, and they're expensive, and they're getting more expensive, but they're probably still not as expensive as they should be to make up for costs of printing, shipping, paper costs, all of that.
Yeah, photography.
I know that the costs of books, they have been going up this year. They were kind of held at a particular point by publishers such as mine, which is 10-Speed Press and Penguin Random House. The cost of book production, and who knows what tariffs will do, right?
Right.
Now we're seeing books like from 35 go up to 40.
Totally.
Right.
40 up to 50, and that's MSRP, so street value.
Well, when you think about it, like when A16 Food and Wine came out in 2008, that was a $35 book. And since 2008, that price hasn't moved up. I mean, every once in a while, a book will come out and it's expensive. Like there's a book called Champagne by Peter Liam. Its price is $80, but it also includes these beautiful vintage maps with a box that has a drawer that you pull out, and the maps are sort of poster size. But that's an anomaly. But, that 35, when you got to 40, I think publishers were seeing, Andrea, I don't know if you know, if you have any facts on this. I don't, but I'm just assuming that once you hit the 40 mark, publishers are seeing drop off in sales. So they kind of didn't want to go above 35 because it was already going to be discounted on Amazon for 30 or whatever. Like Amazon, as a huge seller of books, was really putting, I think, price pressures on publishers.
Totally. Yeah, last year Amazon was doing some funny pricing things on discounting books, and that's kind of the pressure's been let off of that. So things are ever shifting in the pricing of books, like single subject books, like the cookie book that Ben Mims did called Crumbs, and baking, and talking about Joe Yonan. Matt Sartwell mentioned, like this bringing back of single ingredient deep dive books. So, we've got like Steve Sando's bean book. He owns Rancho Gordo, so he knows beans.
Right.
And that book was a bestseller.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's also a branded book.
Yeah.
It's been interesting to see like what brands can successfully sell the book to a publisher, right? Because sometimes it's hard. There are many brands that'll have this dream, we want to do a cookbook, and they get pushed back, we don't do branded books. But then there are like certain brands that slip through, and I feel like Rancho Gordo is one of them. King Arthur, clearly. Were there others this year? I know there were a few last year, like Red Boat Fish Sauce had their book.
Yeah.
But in any case, it's kind of cool to see some of these like beloved brands come out with cookbooks this year.
Yeah. So when you talk about single subject, and that, so to me, single subject is like that expertise, someone who really can go deep into a topic. And it made me think of there's an uptick in these anniversary editions. Rose Levy Berenbaum's Cake Bible is 35 years old, and they came out with a 35-year edition. Now, I haven't looked at it, and I don't know, but it doesn't say revised on the front, so I'm assuming it's just a new edition of a 35-year-old book. And then Jim Leahy's My Bread, which is the No Knead Bread 15th year anniversary.
Yeah.
And I know there have been a few of those over the years, but it seems like there are more and more of those.
I hear that David Leibovitz's Room for Dessert is going to be reissued with new photography.
Right.
How old is that?
Old. Well, I don't want to date David.
Sorry, David.
But I think that's really cool. As an old author, I think that's really cool that these older...
And I think what it says, too, is the power of the backlist. And if we look at where publishers are making their money, they're probably not making their money from the front list books that they're pushing out, the ones that get all the press that are buzzing in our heads right now because we've seen them so much recently on lists and all that, end of the year lists. But really, where a publisher makes their money is their backlist. And I think because backlist books, especially the ones that have lasted and stay in print, there's trust in those books to be good. And so I think they can continue to sell. And so I think if I were a publisher, that's very smart to look at books like My Bread and think this was a really successful book 15 years ago. Why don't we just refresh it? You know, with some new photography, all of a sudden it's another life. People who maybe started cooking only in the pandemic who have never heard of this book can now discover it.
A whole generation of cooks.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's like a whole new audience because it's like movies. I mean, they're remaking the same movies over and over. Fashion.
And the 90s. Definitely. Everything's the 90s because everyone's realizing how many amazing movies were made in the 90s. And now we're just like tired of superhero movies. So maybe, apologies to influencers who are listening to this who have millions of followers, but maybe there'll be a point where the influencer book, like the superhero books, in cookbooks will sort of say, well, actually what we really want is All About Braising by Molly Stevens. And that's where we're going to go for, you know, for recipes we know we can count on.
Tried and true, my friends.
Right.
Tried and true. And I mean, I still have things, you know, that should have shoulder pads on them. So I'm waiting for the 80s to come back. So
I'm sure they're back somewhere at some corner of the internet.
I mean, like publishers are also taking risks on authors with creative ideas. And I'm thinking, you know, Matt had mentioned a few books of authors whom I interacted with in 2024, like Von Diaz's Islas books, which takes a look at tropical island cooking. And, you know, she connects, I guess it's like an equatorial belt.
Right.
Of tropicalness in that book. And also Keanu Moju's Africali, which is very unusual. That's a book that ties together the connections between Nigeria, Kenya, and California. And Keanu is a producer, video producer, who lives in Los Angeles. She's incredibly bright. So, you know, she's providing context for readers to just say, you know, this is what's happening in Africa and California. And immigration from Africa is huge to this country.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Folks from Africa comprise like one of the largest populations of immigrants to America these days. And we need more, you know, African-American books, but also let's check out what's going on in Africa itself.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that something that still feels like a struggle are restaurant books. But that's not to say that chefs can't do books. Like I was just seeing Nook Sutaranan.
Nook is a chef restaurateur of Kalaya in Philadelphia. It's a very popular Thai restaurant there.
The recipes in her book are from the restaurant, but they were definitely adapted for the home cook. And I feel like chefs, where they want to really explore a certain regional cuisine, like if they are the authority on that cuisine or an authority on that cuisine, seems like those books also, there's possibility of selling them. But like the Michelin star restaurant book still seems like a tough sell.
Right. I think 11 in Madison Park came out with a book this past fall, and I didn't really see it anywhere. I haven't seen the book. It might be wonderful, but I feel like 10 years ago that book would have been everywhere in a different kind of way.
Kate, My Egypt that you worked on, Michael Mina's book about
Great point. Yep.
his Egyptian roots, but so it's a chef book, but it's about his lived experience and his, you know, culture, bringing his food. And that's another thing that Matt from Kitchen Arts and Letters talks a little bit about, is these stories that are, and Andrea, you speak about this quite often about, you know, yes, you cook Vietnamese food, but in an American California environment. And so it's these more authentic takes on what people are really cooking, how they're actually living.
Yes, it's like bringing these ideas from other places and seeding them here in the United States and letting them take root.
That's a good point.
So, you know, like in my work with Chef Pim Tetramanvivit on a Thai cookbook, you know, that's what we're always taking a look at, is like, how do we do this at home? It's, you know, her cooking is rooted in home cooking. She's an excellent, excellent home cook. And sometimes she'll want to flex a little bit, and she'll say to me, can't we just, and I'm like, girlfriend, you know, at the end of the day, we're going to be selling more books to home cooks, and you're an excellent home cook. So we have to kind of do certain things, but we can still get those flavors. And I think providing that practicality and that door for people is really important now if you're going to sell books and make them last.
Right. And I think that was one of the things working with Michael Mina. He didn't want to portray himself as an expert in Egyptian food because he knows he's not an expert. He was going to Egypt, and really it was a chef named Mustafa El Rifai who was his guide. And I met Mustafa, and talk about a talented, thoughtful chef. He loves Egyptian cooking so much that he's doing research to kind of save these classic recipes from just disappearing. It was Mustafa who was so much of the inspiration for the book. And then Michael could put his own Mediterranean, California spin on it to make something new. And that was what his drive was. It wasn't to just completely do authentic Egyptian home cooking. It was, that's a book for somebody else, maybe Mustafa. You know, his book was kind of to take that through his lens. And I feel like that's a really interesting place to be for storytelling.
I think what you're pointing to is very fascinating. See, we've got these accomplished chefs whose heritage are steeped in the DNA of where they come from. And they're here in the United States. They've had to kind of tweak their recipes a little bit here and there, but they're just like, God damn it, I want the old school stuff recorded somewhere. Somewhere.
Right.
Because we don't have enough of that in English.
Exactly.
That's really important to them, and they hold on to that before they're going to go, oh yeah, Kate, you could open a can for that ingredient.
It's true. But on the flip side, I'm thinking, because I've worked on, my share of chef cookbooks, and I understand why they're not selling, because I'm thinking of one book, and I won't say the name of the book, but it's a book that I don't think I've ever cooked from since working on it. This was more than a decade ago, but it was too much about what goes on in a professional kitchen. And that's not what works these days. And I think that's a good thing. But I'm thinking about a conversation I had with Celia Sack at Omnivore. I was there for when Nicola Lamb came to do her signing for her book, Sift. And spoiler alert, Nicola's going to be on the podcast in January. So, keep your eyes out for that episode. Celia was talking to me about chef cookbooks, and I said, what's the story with them? Are you seeing anything new about them? And she said, well, there's a curse. First of all, if there's a chef cookbook that comes out, that chef will leave that restaurant, or the restaurant will close, or something like that happens.
Oh my gosh.
So that's the curse. And then the second thing that happens, these books are really expensive to produce, and they don't necessarily sell. So those are those kind of two things that she said. It used to be that a publisher would like to do a chef cookbook because a restaurant was then guaranteed to sell X number of copies. And therefore, it was a very low risk for a publisher to sign a chef to do a cookbook if there was a guaranteed, say, the restaurant would buy 5,000 copies and then they're going to sell them from the restaurant. But that's just not how things really work as much these days. So I think there's a dip. There'll always be an upswing. I mean, chef cookbooks are not going away, but they're not going to be the classic French Laundry cookbook, which is a huge book. That's just not where we're at these days.
Yeah, and I don't predict that that's where we're going either.
Yeah, I agree.
Me neither.
So chefs who, I know there's a book coming in 2025, Betsy Andrews has co-authored it. I know it was a hard sell because it was a chef book and they had to work around to come up with another story to tell, another way. So it's not tied to the restaurant so much.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to talk to Betsy this year.
Yeah.
It's called Coastal. The chef is the one at Dad's Luncheonette in Half Moon Bay.
Yeah.
Betsy's got a good story about how that book came together.
I love all these teasers that we're giving people for stay tuned. There's more.
Right. We hook you in.
Yeah.
Right.
We're talking about the expensive books, and there's a good one coming up. We talked to Clay Williams, who's a food photographer who works on cookbooks. And Kristin and I get into a lot of nitty gritty about why photographs cost so much for cookbooks, because it's a reality.
Right. I can't wait for that. I'll stay tuned. Hit that subscribe button, everyone.
So, okay, we talked a lot about what's happened in the year behind us, but especially since a lot of our listeners are cookbook authors, aspiring cookbook authors, we've talked to some agents and editors about what they are acquiring and what they're looking for. Not so much specifics, but what types of books. So if someone was starting the new year saying, all right, this is the year, I'm going to sign up for Kristin's Cookbook Proposal Boot Camp. I'm going to take the Everything Cookbooks Cookbook Proposal Workshop. What's my book going to be about? So what are agents, editors looking for? What types of books are publishers buying?
Platform, baby.
Oh, we have to start there. We always have to start
the
there.
platform thing, in 2024, there were a number of highly influential authors, such as Caroline Chambers, Sarah Fennell, Justine Dorian, Monique Volz, who knocked it out of the park.
Absolutely.
But they're unicorns. You know, they also offer a particular like wave of food and mood of food that's very appealing to a broad-based audience.
Yeah.
And I understand that and I appreciate that. And their platforms means that they are going to sell.
Right. And they've worked their butts off creating those platforms.
Yes, they do. And, you know, we heard that from Caroline when you and I talked to her.
Sure.
But the thing is that not every single influencer book sells well. True. And I think that by just saying, oh, you're an influencer, we're going to sign you up. That's a bet that doesn't always pay off.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't really get to talk to any editors. So what did y'all learn from talking to folks? I mean, platform's one thing, but, you know, I mean, is it the end all and be all?
It's not the end all be all, but it does seem like in the past, a lot of times it could be idea first. And those types of books are becoming more rare, and it's almost like it's audience first. It's not always that you have to have a huge audience on social media, but you have to be really clear on who that audience is for that book. Perhaps even more so than you used to.
I agree with that. I also want to, this is still on platform, and I know, Kristin, you've talked about this on the podcast before, that we can define platform in different ways. And there is platform just based on sheer number on whatever social media the individual author happens to be on. But there also could be the idea of expertise. Your platform could be expertise. If you are a real expert in a field, that means that maybe it's a single subject book for you. You don't necessarily need thousands and thousands of followers on Instagram, but you need to be established in that field. I tuned in for an IACP editors and writers webinar a few months ago, and Jenny Wapner from Hardy Grant said, you know, for her, if somebody is an expert, they don't need to have a bazillion, a million followers, but they really need to be known for that expertise. And then the Hardy Grant sales team knows how to market that book and push it into the proper sales channels, and also knows that that writer can reach that audience that's interested in that topic as well. So it's not just about having a lot of followers. It's really about also understanding who you're trying to reach and how big that audience is, like Kristin was saying.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to Andrea's point about like big platform or, you know, lots of followers doesn't always mean great book sales. Like in the end, are your people book buyers, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, like Kathleen Schmidt has talked about books are a form of entertainment for many people. And now it's competing for so many forms of entertainment.
Right.
You know, you might have 10 million TikTok followers, but like, are they going to buy a book?
So maybe we should all do actuarial work or something like that, because I mean, it's just a numbers game, right?
Right.
And so if you got 1 million TikTok followers, 2 million, you know, you get like a sliver of that. I'm talking a very small sliver.
I'm so curious about like ages in terms of book buyers, you know, because is there some kind of parallel between if your audience is very young, are they not at least yet buying a lot of books? Whereas if your audience is more in that middle age and above, maybe that audience is more of a book buying audience?
Well, that's a good question, because I know when we had Nick DiGiovanni on, his book sold really well, but I think his book sold because kids really liked his YouTube videos and they told their parents they wanted this book for Christmas or Hanukkah or their birthday or whatnot, because I was hanging out with my partner Patrick's nephew, and what cookbook does he have in his hand but Nick DiGiovanni's book? And so we were looking through it. Oh, which recipe should we make together? So I have a feeling that it depends, but I would think that if you have a Substack that does really well and is known for food recipe type content, probably have a better sell through than if you just have a lot of followers on Instagram. Just a guess.
Because people are already reading.
You're already reading, exactly.
They might be subscribing. They might be paying to subscribe.
And most people on Substack don't pay. And so they're like, okay, I'm going to buy the book, you know, for like $35, $40. And that's less than a year subscription. And it's all there. Mm-hmm. So, you know, books are not going to die as people predicted.
No. I feel like if anything, like I've just seen with so many trends. It's like, yes, AI is going to become more and more big, but then because of that, people are just going to be craving more and more sort of like human, real experiences. And I feel like that would include books.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that going analog is going to be like very attractive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think it was also something Jenny Wapner said about, we talked about expenses before, but also marketing departments, like all departments have been reduced. There's just not a team there that there used to be. So if a publisher has someone who they think has a built-in marketing plan or strategy, that's obviously attractive. But the other thing Jenny said that I thought was really interesting was about specialty markets, figuring out maybe the book isn't going to be big sort of in the mass market, but I think her example was a pasta book at Crate and Barrel, where you know, tie it with cookware or something, but these alternate ways to move books. Kristin and I listened to this podcast about book talk, which took me a while. I was like, what's book? It's not book talk, it's book talk, but TikTok for books. I don't know if there's a cookbook talk, but it's not as a book talk is a whole thing. And there's just all these channels of people who talk about books. And the conversation that I listened to was about whether they actually sell books and how much they actually sell books. And nobody really knows, but
yeah,
those are the real questions. Like, are these platforms, are these numbers, are these people who scroll through and see you follow you on Instagram or Threads or TikTok or wherever you're watching people? And we know Instagram doesn't convert. People don't buy books. So it's a funny game.
Do you want to hear an interesting story? It's not about cookbook sales, but it is about an author using social media to test social media to see how she can convert a book that had come out probably in 2020 to more sales. The author's name is Lee Stein. She's written nonfiction and fiction. Her Substack is excellent. It's called Attention Economy. So you can guess what she's really focused on, getting those eyeballs to read your work. And what she did was she scrubbed her Instagram clean and started from scratch and pretended she was an employee at a company that was the base of her novel that she wanted to boost sales. So she created this whole sort of, all these reels and social media content about this fictional company. And some friends were really confused. They're like, oh, I'm sorry you lost your job, and like all these kind of things. She got like more than 1 million sort of views for this one reel she put out about losing her job at this fictional company. I mean, she gave people the hint that this was satire and this was just a thing.
Oh my God, that's great.
Then she looked at her sales and she said, okay, this was when I did this campaign. I did it in the spring. So royalty statements come out, and I won't give away the numbers because I think that's private for her, but she did boost her sales by doing the strategy.
Wow.
And her whole thing is like, you do have to do things. You don't have to be like Instagram is your life, but the more you can engage with your audience, it does benefit authors.
You have to circle back to former titles.
Yeah.
Dust things off, as Heidi Swanson has reminded me over and over.
Something I want to bring up we touched on was production costs of books. Lori Galvin, she's kind of wondering if because of production costs, surely going up, if finally we will like break the kind of monopoly on cookbooks always having to have tons of photos. I actually picked up this great little book, You Gotta Eat, by Margaret Ebi. It's with Cookbooks, so it really is a little book. It's $20, but it's 2-color printing, like on the inside. Ooh. I mean, it's really minimal in terms of design. The idea is, hey, we all get tired. Sometimes we are depressed. Here's just some like super quick ideas. But I'm very curious to see like how a book like this does and if there's room for more of them occasionally, because there is something like satisfying about a little $20 very simply designed book.
Right. It's really interesting.
I love that.
I have to throw this in. We're talking about food influencers and platform and TikTok. I'm sure you've heard about it, but a new NBC sitcom that's been announced, and it's a new workplace sitcom, and it's Julie Bowen, who is from Modern Family, and she's the editor at a legacy food magazine that gets bought by a tech bro from Silicon Valley, and she has to work with these young TikTok chefs to make this magazine work or something. And it's a thing that people are realizing this sort of conflict in the food media.
Oh, can you imagine, though, if you could get your cookbook onto that show as one of the books that maybe they're talking about? So it's very meta.
Right.
It's like a show about food creation. Then you're like, oh, mention, because in the Bear, they had
the
this
cookbook shelf at the Bear.
The cookbook shelf, yeah. And it was like, oh, like somebody tagged me because like a book I worked on a million years ago was on the shelf in the first season. It was like, oh my God. And it actually did boost sales. I looked at the Amazon numbers out of curiosity that day and it was like, bloop.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
So it doesn't last, but those little hits, they do add up.
Yeah, imagine consulting on this new show, like helping them figure out, like,
Oh my
Sounds
God.
really fun.
Yeah.
well, Kristin, you've worked at magazines. I've worked at legacy food magazines, and it would be kind of cool to see how they build it.
I'm literally picturing Dana Cowan in my head. like having to go through something like that.
I've seen so many crazy things, but I agree that it could have been done maybe 10, 15 years ago or 20 years ago when things were really hot.
Really hot. Yeah,
right.
Juicy.
But now, I mean, for us, yes, because we're inside this world.
We're mature,
But
well-seasoned.
We've been paying attention to it for a long time, but the fact that it's made it to sort of mainstream entertainment.
I think it ought to be about cookbook publishing.
Yeah.
We could totally consult on it, from so many different angles.
Hey, NBC. We're here for you. So if our podcast drops off in 2025, we're on our way to Hollywood, right?
Yeah. Right. Hey, it's Kate, and I want to tell you about a new podcast I love, The Dinner Plan. On our show, we talk to authors and other professionals about the book creation process. But do you ever wonder what these seasoned cookbook authors have in their fridge right now, or what they cook for comfort, or where they turn to for ideas? I know I do, and host Maggie Hoffman, the former digital director of the recipe website Epicurious, asks all those questions and more. It's not only about cooking inspiration, but also about finding joy in the kitchen. You can find The Dinner Plan wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Let's just talk about, say you're an author without a huge platform.
Say you have a small platform, and by small platform, we mean 20,000 followers or under. In that case, you can still write a book. You can write a book that's that single subject, like that what Jenny Wapner was talking about. If you're an expert and you have the credentials, you're a writer, you have good, strong writing skills. That's very important. And chances are you've also pitched stories and have had bylines about this subject. That's part of your platform, even if it doesn't translate to Instagram followers. So that's something to think about. And there's still an appetite for those books. And I think there will be forever, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so too.
And what are we got some great ideas from some of our contributors in terms of what genres might fit that.
Right. Well, like I reached out to Claire Yee, a senior editor at 10 Speed Press. She's always looking for new classics that teach fundamental basics. So, in her words, there are always space for these. And especially if it's a new angle with a trusted voice. So trusted voice, that's key for expertise.
Yep. She also, Claire says, narrative cookbooks from authors who aren't traditionally represented. I know that's a big focus for Claire as well as other publishers. So again, back to the diversity of books that we've seen this year, let's hope that continues, that we're not just going to focus on the big influencer books, right?
Yeah.
We heard again and again, cookbook as memoir is continuing. We're going to keep seeing that. And again, that's that voice.
Right. And that voice, of someone who's your coach, your buddy in the kitchen cooking with you, just kind of like messing with the instructions a little bit in recipe writing and head notes and whatnot. I think that's very valuable to readers. And we start seeing that in current books. And it seems to be something that could really last and move book sales.
Yeah. And Sally Ackes puts it that expert deep dives that teach something and that no one else could write. It's your book. She's very specific about vegan dessert books, comfort meals, grilling books for women. And then the one we heard again and again and again is high protein.
Yeah, of all sorts.
Is meat the new meat,
Meat is a new vegetable. I have so many issues with that.
I know. Any others on that list that we want to share?
This is something my agent Jonah Strauss brought up, which is outside of cookbooks, he's had trouble selling really serious nonfiction or reported nonfiction. And the romance genre has just blown up and is going crazy. And I'm wondering if that desire to escape is just going to continue.
I think humor in cookbooks, too.
Oh, yeah, that would be great.
Oh, yeah. We need more of that.
There could be humor in cookbooks.
Totally. We have fun in the kitchen.
Without the joke being that the dish didn't work out.
Yeah, no one should experience my mother in their kitchen.
And one thing, though, if you're pitching yourself as a funny writer, don't say you're a funny writer. Like, show it in your writing, because that's sort of like, I have a funny voice. And then the agent's going to say, prove it. I don't think this is funny. You're already setting yourself up for a very big challenge.
The other thing, too, is copy editors, listen up. We're coming for you with our words.
Oh, boy. This is getting spicy as we're wrapping up.
I love it.
I think, we have so many great conversations in store for 2025. I mean, I think we'll keep talking about what platform means, what a small platform can do really successfully. We're going to talk about the connection with health and food. I think that's something we're hearing from agents and booksellers, and we're going to be exploring that a little bit more. And also, maybe on a personal note for all of us, what it means to be healthy just as a creator, as someone who's writing, as someone who wants to keep their brain engaged in the work and not reach the point of burnout, which I think is that danger zone with all this talk about platform. There's so much to look forward to in 2025, and so much more to talk about. I guess, I'm sorry, everyone. I think we're going to have to keep podcasting.
I guess so.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, our list of upcoming episodes is just keeps getting longer. So there is so much to talk about, and we are here for it. And we're glad that our listeners are here to listen. I think with that, we're going to wish everyone a happy new year.
Live long and prosper.
Right.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. The show is available wherever you get your audio, and if you like what you hear, please leave a review. Any book mentioned in the show can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thank you, as always, to our editor, Abby Circatella, and until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.